the biggest issue that I see between people who make 10K a month and the people who make 30K a month and above is that they do not possess the identity of the person who makes 30K a month and above. And I went in depth to solve this issue last year, and we ended up doing that with my boy Moksh, which we got him a 31.5K USD month in August. And with that, we understood that it wasn't about the tactics, the strategies, the information, that all he had in abundance. It was about transforming his identity. And I've done that with all of my clients. And in this video, I'm going to go into why it is wrong that you should not be focusing on anything except the ability that you have to transform your identity at each different level, from 0 to 10 to 30K a month and above. I'm going to go through exactly what it takes to do so and all of the strategies that you might need to use and your approach to mindset in this space. Now, I've worked with so many people on this, but I know for a damn fact that if you implement whatever you see and hear in this video, you're going to make some money and people won't recognize you. You may even end up on my testimonials page if you fancy, but who knows? I guess that is up to you. But first off, we have this big concept of identity, and a lot of people get this wrong. But to start off with, your identity is always going to be tied in some small ways to the amount of money that you earn, unless you focus it with the right approach. Income equals identity, whether you work a corporate job, whether you work just a regular restaurant job like I used to, whether you have your own business, info coaching offer, or a digital product, whatnot, you will always have a part of your identity that you see yourself as a certain person who earns this amount. And in order to get up and up and up, you have to get really, really good of understanding where your identity lies, what thoughts are coming up, and the entire spectrum of what I'm going through in this video is helping you understand what identity you're currently at and how to transcend each level. And when I did it with my client Moksh, we spent so much time understanding what information he had and all the tactics, and then we went to a conclusion that identity was the biggest lever between him and his income goals. So you can check out that video just on whatever corner it's popping up in the screen on me and him discussing how that went. But for now, the first concept that a lot of people get wrong, and this is an issue that sticks around for months and months, all the way up to your entire career when it comes to from 0 to $1 million a month. Everyone's going to have this problem, and it's called fearing the fall off, because your problems only get bigger as you go up. And so it's very important that you understand what your problems and how they affect your mental state, because you end up getting a bunch of thoughts that might derail you, decentralize yourself from your center of gravity, and that will end up causing a lot of problems if you are focusing on the wrong things within them, because they distort the way you see yourself as someone who is a reactionist, a victim. You become a victim of your own thoughts, where literally I've had myself and a bunch of one of my clients being sat at their desk going, oh, it's too much work to do, man. So much stress. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills on time because of this, and this. Like, stop, relax. And quite literally, that's one of the first steps, is to relax. When you are in a headspace that is purely in a constant state of relaxation, you're able to attract the right thoughts and intercept the wrong ones. So what do we have in terms of being a victim of your own thoughts? Well, this person is a reactionist in comparison to being a response type of individual. So a victim gets adversity, right? They experience some sort of adversity in their reality, whatever you want to describe it as, your experience of reality, your physical plane, whatnot. They experience that adversity, which leads them to have a thought generated. Now, this thought would typically be handled differently whether you're a reactionist or someone who responds, someone who is an observer of our thoughts, but I'll get into that process in a second. The adversity that comes into your mind brings a thought to play, and this allows the victim to then fall victim to that thought, which then leads to them having a shift in perception. From the way they see themselves, let's say it's something about like they lose a deal on a sales call. They see themselves as someone who can't close deals with a specific objection, and they go, that call went really bad. They keep zooming in on that thought, where to the point where it shifts your perception. And that's very dangerous because it decentralizes where you stand in your own identity at the time. And so immediately you go from thinking you're a certain person to then having a complete shift in identity without you even knowing it. So it's very, very important you understand when this happens and when you're being a victim to your own thoughts. But you can only really do that from being in a relaxed position. But again, when this person has a shift in that perception, they really can't get a grip of, where to go within this, and they sort of have a complete shift in where they were before. So their center of gravity gets destabilized, also known as just sort of going down a rabbit hole, and they react. Whatever action they take from there only perpetuates the cycle. If you're a victim of your own thoughts, you will never be able to get out of that unless you see yourself differently. And if you get to the state of being an observer, which I will also get into in a sec, you will always be in a reaction state, which will only lead to being in the same exact identity, being in the same exact state, so that more sales calls happen where that guy loses deals based on that current objection. They only see themselves as someone who can't surpass that. So the more you react, the more you perpetuate the cycle, the more you don't fix the root problem, which is the shift in perception. And when you have that adversity next time, it will only ever happen in this exact order. But the funny thing about being a guy who helps people with identity is you can really see it happen from a second perspective. But on a first person perspective where you're experiencing it in real time, it's almost invisible. But let's say you want to change that. Let's say you want to become an observer of your thoughts. And all my clients, when it comes to them experiencing some less than ideal reality, I teach them something called thought observation, which is a bit on the nose for being an observer. But this person views their thoughts as not happening to them, but just something that is a product of the current state, the current identity that they are in. So it's much easier for them to view them as something that can take a toll on their perception. So they take some time to understand them more than anyone else would. So being an observer of your thoughts, what does that mean? You experience that same adversity, but instead of that thought taking hold of them and shifting their perception, they simply sit in a relaxed state. Literally, I was doing this yesterday when I was filming this exact same YouTube video, and I was doing this exact same topic, and I was getting quite frustrated. I was experiencing the adversity of my camera dying, my mic's dying, lights dying, all the stuff has batteries in it that's probably running out of battery at some point. And I was losing lines on my script when I now have changed and I've sort of been in this relaxed state and able to take the right action by responding in the right way. But this is only happening because when the adversity hit me, I sit in that relaxed state and I was able to notice the thoughts instead of letting them shift my perception. Notice and observe thoughts. And the literal process behind this, when it comes to this, I've made a video in the past about this, but when I say notice and observe, we are talking about understanding exactly what these thoughts are, the validity of them, how they progress us in the grand scheme of things, and if it would be something we would choose to say to someone that we love or admire. Now, the key part of thought observing is emotion, because when you're in a state of being a victim of your thoughts, you're in a heightened state of emotion. You're not in the right state to be able to respond in the right way. So now we just need to regulate our emotions, which is what relaxation does. It puts you in a calm state to the point where you can see each and every thought that's coming up in the right context. Or think of it as like a bed of soil that the right thoughts can grow from. And I think it's the most important thing in mindset, entrepreneurship, just dealing with stress in general. Like when people say breathe, they're literally talking about this, but just on a very, very small scale. Thinking about what we need to do in this relaxed state comes down to this process here. This is the game changer. From all I teach my clients, you're all in a state of heightened emotion. You're relaxing now, but you need to be able to progress yourself in the right way and utilize this state, which comes down to 3 questions. Is it true? When that thought comes up, let's say I'm not the type of guy who can close this deal, that objection, I just couldn't get over that objection. Or when it comes to a team member leaving you, or one of your ads really performing badly, some of your content, everything comes down to first of all, is it true? Is it true the fact that you don't think that ad could have performed better? Is it true the fact that you don't think you have a good enough team for this A player to stay? Is it true the fact that you don't think you could close those types of deals? Because it will come up as a thought, very subtly, almost invisible, that you think to some degree that statement is true. But when you're in that relaxed state, the first thing you should do is ask yourself, is it true? And most of the time, it's not going to be. So you say, no, it's not true. Okay, well then, is it helpful? Based on your long-term goals, based on the thing that you are working towards, the mission that you have, is it helpful? Is you speaking that to yourself and seeing yourself in that way, is that helpful at all? Well, no, because it has this progression and it has this goal that I'm going after, but it doesn't help towards that whatsoever. Well, no. Well then, cool. Third thing is really tapping into that emotional side of things, which we come down to, would I choose it? When I say would I choose it, it's choosing to say that to someone that you admire. Imagine someone that you love is in the exact same position that you are right now. But you can see clearly now that you're in that relaxed state, certain truths. And would you choose to say that to someone in that exact same position? Well, no. I always imagine like if I was having a doubtful thought about me hopping up on stage and speaking, like public speaking, which is something that I believe everyone can do if they have the right intuition, then if my mum went out on stage to do a public speech at some point and I ended up having that exact same thought, but thinking, would I choose to say that to my mum before she went out on stage? Well, no. You don't have the conviction or confidence, like you don't have the credibility to speak to all those people, like 1,000 people out there in the audience. Or would I choose to say that? Well, fuck no. Would I choose to say to my guy who's my business partner, like, you can't close that deal yet, you don't have that objection handling training yet? Like, dude, of course you wouldn't fucking say that. So no, you would not choose that thought. And at that point, you've got 3 points of evidence to suggest no, no, no. And this leads us to question number 4, which is why hold on to it. And when it comes to the fear of falling off, this is something where you rationalize the worst case scenario. You get down to all 3 questions, like, is it true the fact that I think I'm going to go back to my old job or my old life? Is it helpful to the fact that I want to progress to this level, this amount? No. Or would I choose to say to someone else who's in my exact same position, like, dude, you should just quit. Like, you shouldn't just go back to your old job. Like, this is not working out for you. Well, no. None of that is true. You can extrapolate this concept to anything that you might be having in terms of stress or adversity in business. But I can tell you for a fact, these 3 questions in this relaxed state, once you've noticed what thoughts are coming up and you challenge them, it's going to change pretty much everything about how you operate and how you see yourself when it comes to you having a negative voice and that not being a part of you, and your true self, which comes out after these 4 questions get asked about a specific thought. Why hold on to it? And so, as soon as you ask that, the thought gets let go. It's like magic. And that is one of the biggest things you can do, get into a relaxed state, observing that thought in a way which allows it to be noticed and challenged, and then going through to be able to shift back your center of gravity. Centralize. Center of gravity. Center of gravity. Because then, as soon as you get back to any adversity, you can just do it again. And it's not affected you to the degree that it would. It's broken the cycle of you being in a victim state and not being able to control your thoughts, because you have complete control over your thoughts. And those are the things that move the needle the most in terms of your identity, how you see yourself, because they will always be a part of that identity that is coming out. The way you see yourself will always manifest later in your own thoughts. So being able to control these thoughts at some point is super useful. But that's one of the tactics that I use with all my clients. But one of the bigger problems that you see in this state and this space as a whole is like people do not have the habits of the person they're trying to go to. For example, Mock didn't have the habits of the 30K a month self that he wanted to. Every time that he tried to do certain things and make them habitual, it often ended up failing, because when it comes to how you see yourself, you cannot surpass a certain level. You can't add a habit based on how you see yourself being able to achieve and operate. And when I say that, it all comes down to having a level of self-trust. Now, your self-trust is pretty one-to-one with how you see yourself. If you trust yourself to do this certain thing and operate in a certain way, then that will generate into conviction. And the whole process on this is like, a routine is not fucking anything. A routine, and I like to define this as a amount of self-trust. Spelt with 2 U's there. No, that's an R. Stacked into a day. An amount of self-trust stacked into a day. And you can define that in any way you would like, but to be honest, the amount of things you do in your day that you say you're going to do and you do, or avoiding stuff that you said you weren't going to do, just ends up being what most people will call a routine, but a stack of self-trust that you organize into your day. But the real thing that you really want to focus on is the fact that when you reach a certain level of self-trust, I like to call it a little self-trust tank that you get. As soon as this rises up to a certain level, it generates into conviction, which conviction is the one resource. Once you exchange self-trust for conviction, you can exchange conviction that you have to change your identity in some way. Once you realize that you've done these things enough, you can say to yourself that I am this person. That is the amount of conviction that it takes for you to be able to say that I am a 30K a month operator. And you can only do that by keeping your word. One of the big concepts I want to think about when you come to habits is your word is law. Let me get the red pen out to underline this, because this is one of the more important concepts when it comes to transforming your identity. If you can make your word law, you can uphold it at every single point when it comes to your progression to a certain level, then you will be able to say that you are this person. If your word is law, then of course, when you say that you are this person, it will become law. And that is how you need to be treating everything that you say to yourself. When you have daily commitments that you're not committing to and you're not doing something, all you're doing is decreasing this self-trust tank. And as soon as it reaches the top, it generates a conviction, which means you'll be able to transform your identity, but never until you start treating your word seriously. It will always be going down, 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 if you're not treating it with the same respect that you would if you were this person, this 30, 50K a month self. Transcending your identity just means fucking like doing what you're saying you're going to do and not doing what you say you weren't going to do. And that becomes a super useful resource for you to be able to get up in life and put all this connection between you and this person, because you're not disconnected from the person that you are trying to be. You just have to have the exact same amount of self-trust that that person has to generate enough conviction to go up at each level. And what a lot of people get wrong when it comes to habits is they're trying to start like way too early on the things that would mean they can be a certain operator. Like they just put all of the habits in like a whiteboard or something and say, I'm going to do these things every single day. But Patrick Bet-David did this little like staircase thing, and I've been using it ever since just because it's super useful to explain. There will be levels for identity, and you will suck at each one of them. But the way that you transcend each level is that this is going to suck, this is going to suck, and this is going to suck as well. But to go across this way in order to get up the staircase in the first place is just building self-trust. And when I say self-trust, it literally is internal self-trust. It's the internal trust that you have for yourself. It's not trusting anyone else. It's purely you. Building self-trust. And at this point, you'll be thinking, well, Alex, what the fuck do you mean by that? Everything that you say you're going to do and you do gets you across to this. But every time you don't do something that you say you were going to do, or you do something you said you wouldn't do, you stay at this level. And that's why this sucks. It's because you're simply not holding yourself to a certain standard and respecting your own word. But when you have the same level of self-trust as the person that you're trying to get to, whether it be 15K a month, 30K a month, 50, whatnot, at this stage, you are here as long as you trust yourself enough to the same degree. Just build it up. And as soon as you get to that generates the conviction, you can get up the next level, and then it's going to suck. This is the reason why that any point and at any level you are at, you just have to have the same conducive amount of self-trust, because it takes the conviction for you to be able to change your identity at each level. And that's why it sucks. That's why when you don't do the things that you say you're going to do, or you disrespect your own word, that's what keeps you in this sucky area. You're not able to do the things that you want to do, and you just sort of stay in that same cycle, perpetuating all the negative habits that you might have. But habits are just a stack of self-trust to a degree where you generate that enough conviction to maintain it and then get to the next level. All those things that you thought were, habits that you were building are now automatic, and now you've got to generate a new set. So very important to understand the concept of habits and how they affect you internally. And that is one of the things which got me and Moksha like really dialed when it came to how he operated. And just in general, like all my clients, if I can teach them the ability and the skill of habits, then they can change their entire identity, because it just is one of the bigger needle movers for pushing forward a new identity. But when it comes down to pushing yourself out of negative scenarios, like the concept of scarcity, it is very important that you understand the previous concepts and also add another level to it. What I mean by another level is there is a thing that I like to use, which is called the levels of knowing, which, let's say you've got a certain amount of exposure to a certain concept. Let's say you read it on Instagram somewhere. That would be at level 1. And the levels of knowing allow you to understand like where you are at currently on your own conviction. Because once you've built up enough self-trust, you can imagine that it will, generate into conviction. But you're probably asking me, like, when does that happen? Well, the levels of knowing help us understand that. Level number 1 is exposure. We are exposed to a certain thing that we then, we kind of know it. Like you saw on Instagram that, doing this certain funnel is the best way to get clients in for your agency or whatnot. Then, you're kind of exposed to the idea that that's kind of true, right? Level number 2 is experience. you sit there and you implement that certain thing, and you experience that, that ad strategy is done really well. The profile funnel is actually really, really well. Like just the first experience of you doing that went really well. So let's say we've done this thing. In between here and there, we've said, yeah, I'm going to do this thing. You've used your word to get from here to there. Number 3 is consistent experience. And this, to get from here to there, is treating your word as law. So even then, the whole concept behind you getting conviction, it still only ends here. Level 3, you're consistently doing the thing and you're making consistent things that make you know that this is true. When I say that, like your ad strategy that you tried out once and then you tried it again and you said, I'm going to do this every single day. I'm going to use this as my main funnel. That is how it gets to that point where you're like, yeah, dude, I'm pretty sure, like I believe this to be like one of the best methods to do anything. And that's the key word that I'm going to put on the right here. When it comes to like kind of knowing, this one is like, yeah, it works. Yeah, it's true. I'll say that. This one is believing. Like I believe this is the best method ever. But belief is honestly one of the weaker emotions. Like people don't understand how sort of like lackluster this word is. Like if you believe something, there is still a potential for that thing to not be true. Like you kind of believe, yeah, I believe that to be true. There's still room in that sentence for you to be like, nah, doubting exactly what you think is true. But consistent experience is not enough. What you need to get to, and what actually brings you conviction in your life, where you said that, let's say 5 clients were signed this month, you're like, I knew that was going to happen. That is because you are living in that truth. Living in that truth. When you go from being exposed to a certain thing to then going down the pipeline of things and getting to living in that truth of what you were previously exposed to, and then you tried it out and you consistently tried it out and you implemented it, and then you get to the living in that truth. Once you've treated your word as law in that scenario, then you get a big old boost to your self-trust, and then you get conviction in that certain thing, which then allows you to know. And when I say this, when it comes to living in scarcity, there's so many things where you get a small exposure to scarcity. You look at your bank account and you go, oh, I haven't got enough of that. And my definition of scarcity is simply the idea that you don't have enough based on a strong emotional event that happens. Because when you have an exposure to a strong emotional event, that will start to embed itself in small little amounts into your subconscious. And when it becomes automatic and stuff that you do all the time, it's simply got a continued exposure, level 3, to your subconscious mind. So at that point, it starts to believe, and that thing is truth. And there are no truths in life except what your subconscious mind adapts and believes to be true. That's when we can start to really understand how conviction gets to knowing, and how like when random stuff happens in your life, but you know, and you had a bit of deja vu that thing was going to happen. All it had was enough exposure to experience a consistent experience, and then living in your subconscious mind to say that thing was going to happen. So you can extrapolate that to manifestation if you want, but for now, like we're just going to use it for the context of when you have an experience of scarcity, like the fear of not having enough, essentially, as a result of misplaced attention on emotional experiences. When it comes to that scarcity, you really need to understand these levels of knowing to be like, okay, where am I at with this scarcity? How much of my past, my old childhood, everything has brought me to which level of this? If I'm living in that truth that I do not have enough money, I do not have experience, enough opportunities, enough clients, then you will consistently have your attention placed on that. And that is very dangerous. But if you have certain truths that you live in, that you constantly place your attention on, because you've had a consistent experience to living in that truth, you'll be in the space to be like, I know this to be true. I have an abundance of certain things. So it goes both ways. To put it into context, we had a certain event where his personal life of one of my clients at this point, getting into 30K a month, was getting in the way of him being able to be in abundance on certain things. And that was an emotional event, which we were like, we need to really tackle that, because currently we've consistently experienced this. And we've gone into this state where we know or believe something to be true. So that affects the rest of what we do. And if you want to break free from the idea of being in scarcity on certain things, you have to use the same exercises as before with thought observation, but also put a strong emphasis on where your attention is being placed at each level. you will be in that state, and it will continue to perpetuate certain cycles. And that's where you might experience adversity and go, I know that to be true. Like, fuck, this is always going to happen. This always happens to me. You're at this thing. Or even number 4, you've got so much conviction in the fact that you are always the type of guy to experience this type of adversity. Like, this always happens to me. I never convert leads at this stage. I'm just never get anyone booked on calls. All of this stuff, like, you need to realize where you are before you start thought observing and doing other stuff, because it really helps you to understand how to transmute those feelings. Now, when you have a certain level of knowing to a certain things, you will always be pulled towards them. When it comes down to, like, you know how you brush your teeth, like, you've done that consistently, you live in the fact that you have a certain routine with brushing your teeth. You will always be, like, drawn to things in marketing and advertising and relationships, just attraction and everything. You'll be drawn to certain truths in your reality based on what you know to be true. And you will ignore other things. You'll sort of have a filter for life based on what you think you know and live in. So it's very important to be, like, aware of your own thoughts when it comes to that. Once you know your level of knowing and you're sat there thinking, well, it's only because I've experienced this so much that I think this to be true in certain ways. That's super valuable, because you can essentially just transform your mindset in so many small different ways around how you approach other things based on knowing that this might not actually be true. This might not be the best way to do it. But once I know that I'm either living or consistently experiencing something, I can be in the right space to get rid of those feelings, whether it be scarcity, whether it be something where you're stressed about certain things about work, where you never feel like anything goes your way. There's so many things you can do to get rid of those feelings. And I think this is going to be a super useful concept. But the way to layer even more on top of this is to take the emotional experiences that cause these subconscious truths and understand how to reverse them through what you typically teach my clients as visualization in its simplest form. The same way where you can, go back and see your previous wins, you can go back and into the future even to visualize what you might be thinking about in your mind as a future scenario. You can expose yourself in one scenario to a certain truth. You can expose yourself to the scenario that you handled a situation really well with a client, or you signed 5 clients in a day, and you look at your Stripe dashboard of certain things. I did that before I hit my first 30K month, and it ended up being a reversal of my scarcity, where I was like, dude, I actually can make this amount of money in a day. Like, that's my first exposure. And then I continued to do it. I ended up having, visceral experiences by just allowing my mind to visualize someone that I admired in that scenario, having a very cool detail in there, like me dapping someone up, or in the same room that I used to dream about. And then all of this visual detail ends up giving us a visceral experience, because our mind cannot tell the difference between something that is lived and is in the reality that we now perceive and something that is imagined. And that's a real unlock, because you can experience stuff even without experiencing it in your reality to a certain degree, where you get to level 3. You treat your word as law within that same visualization, and you know that you're doing exactly what you say you're going to do. All of that builds so much self-trust during that consistent visualization, to the point where you start living in that truth. You start experiencing it in your reality like it's nothing, like it's automatic. And that is a really powerful tool, especially when it comes to scarcity. You can rewrite all of the old programming that you had, maybe from your childhood and what your parents taught you when you were growing up, or just small things like you didn't have enough to pay for groceries when you were 10 as a family and you had to go borrow some money from friends. Like, that can be an embedded emotional scenario, which allows you to misplace your attention on the wrong things when you might be in a physical state of scarcity. What things you need to understand in there is that it's essentially brainwashing. But people might call it brainwashing and get really, skeptical about everything. But in my head, everything is fucking brainwashing. Social media, the way you wake up in the morning and you look and you go do a certain routine, you're constantly brainwashing yourself or hypnotizing yourself in some way. So you might as well know how to do it intentionally and in the right way to remove some emotional blocks, so you can actually fucking get shit done, and remove some of the old things that are keeping you hostage when it comes to scarcity, fear, stress, getting into the state of abundance, like flow, being able to work without fucking anything holding you back in terms of your work. All of this stuff comes from being really skilled at getting to the level of knowing in a certain truth that you want to be true, based on your identity that you want to get to. Let's say the 30K month version of yourself believes that they can sign 10K deals in a day. Then it's important to expose yourself to that idea, first of all, experience that, get to a state where you're consistently experiencing that through visualization, and then living in that truth that you are that guy that can sign 10K deals in a day. And that's what helped us mostly, because we ended up just being like, no, at the very end of the call when we were trying to collect the cash, it was like, no, I don't think I'm that guy. And it sort of just allowed them to let the guy off the call with as many objections as possible, because that conviction that you get when you live in that truth that you are that guy that can take those deals and can collect enough cash to meet your targets for the month and really push forward to that next identity, it really comes down to having enough self-trust at this stage and having enough conviction at this stage. So then you get from being like kind of knowing it to yeah, it's probably true that I can do that, to I believe I can do that, to I know I can fucking do that. And then that call becomes effortless. And in any other scenario you can extrapolate that to, becomes effortless, automatic. But saying yes to a lot of opportunities, I see this all the time on social media, where it's like, you're young, you're in your 20s, say yes to everything. But in reality, you're training your brain to not have the sense of self that you think it might have. And that is one of the huge parts of how you see yourself. If you see yourself as someone who says yes to everything, then how can you expect to have any level of discipline when it comes to the things that you do want to say yes to eventually? So when I see people who are saying yes to everything and who aren't saying no or learning the skill of saying no, that is genuinely what keeps them behind 30k a month, flat out. If you say yes to everything, you're saying yes to shiny objects as well as your real opportunities, and you can't differentiate them. So some of you guys who are new to info, or at least under 10k a month, will definitely have this problem. And it's very important to take it in stride and really understand what that means for you. And saying no, if you can get a hold of that, you will understand how to transmute and how to get out of certain identities, because you will always stay in a certain identity if you keep saying yes to certain things that are conducive with your old identity. And that basically means, what I like to define your ability to have that sense of saying no is integrity, which I would define as morality and focus combined to create a response integral to your own success or towards a certain identity. Doing the right thing, even if nobody is watching, is another identity, is another definition of that. Stuck with me ever since, but I like to create my own definition of morality and focus combined to make a intuition, if you will, intuitive response towards a certain level of success that you want to hold towards yourself. Now, what I mean by morality, just right and wrong, just the distinction between that, and focus, simply having one thing that you are set on. When you have those two combined, you can make a response. And what that mean for you when it comes to having the morality, let's say someone who hops on a sales call with you is not your ICP, and you know that that person doesn't really need your program. You're being immoral by taking that person on and saying, yes, come on, you're a great fit for the program. But essentially you just want money and you're not using the same morality. So morality, super fucking important in this space, because you're just going to get people on your calls who don't get results, who don't actually understand what you do, who just want to see if you can help them. But in reality, you know for a fact that you are not the right person for them, and they're not the right person for your program. So having that morality at this stage is super key, because you see yourself as a guy who's immoral by that standpoint, by saying yes to those people, saying yes to those opportunities. So stop doing it. Once you have morality, you need the other element of focus. You have to have a goal. You have to have that one thing that you ride or die for, and you're currently not saying anything else. You're not saying yes to anything else but that. Which, once you understand that, you combine these two, you can have integrity. And that becomes a part of your identity. We need to have sort of things that we bring into our own identity and we hold as our values. I wrote this on a Miro board when we were starting off with Moksha, 2k a month. And this was one of the things where we were like, okay, what do we actually value? Well, if integrity is one of our values, saying no, that's pretty useful early on to break through this 0 to 30k a month mark. And that's what happened. So if you can visualize yourself as we did with the levels of knowing before, to get to that stage where you've said no to clients, or doing it in the physical plane, if you will, on calls, if you can get to that point where it's like, I've said no to so many people, I'm a moral person, I have so much focus in what I'm doing, and that will equal the success that you're looking for. The more you can say no to people, the more opportunities you will attract in the first place, because you don't need those opportunities. You need to be a moral and focused person to get to the stage that you want to get to. It equals integrity at some point, which also equals success. So, super important concept. I made this mistake a ton, and I'm sure that if you have clients or you have been in this space for a while, you would have had that problem where you said yes to too many things, you stacked your plate. And that's one of the biggest things that people get wrong, is they assume that they should be a master of all trades, when in reality, if they have the morality and the focus, they will only accept certain clients. They will hop on client calls and start it with 5 minutes off and go, you're not the right fit for me. You'll hop into an event or like a group call, and you realize I don't need to be focusing on this. This is my thing. I'm going to say no to this, and I'm going to get to my real task that I said I was going to do. Saying all comes back to self-trust and being your word being law. But if you can visualize your things, saying no to things and actually acting in that, then that's going to be a big part of your identity. That's going to make you a ton of stuff happen. It's going to make a ton of stuff happen. You're going to do yourself a ton of favors when it comes to getting up in business early on. So totally recommend it. And I honestly have experienced this myself quite a lot. So it's not a bad thing that you don't have this just yet. It really isn't. You need to be able to have compassion for yourself and give yourself a bit of grace when it comes to getting rid of this, because you'll want to say yes to a lot of things. You'll want to say yes to a ton of opportunities, but it's super important that you don't. It's very important you hold that focus. And from the people that I've spoken to who are making 30, 50, I've spoken to so many people making 100K a month, and all of them say no. They have the biggest habit and the identity of the person who says no. One thing that nobody talks about, which I'm actually low-key pissed off about, but I'm gonna hold myself, is when you're choosing your mentors, you go for who has the most success. Who's got the Lamborghini or the, the big penthouse. I'm not gonna use the Lambo boy example for now because it's not something that I give a fuck about, but you say yes to certain mentors, which, going back to our previous point, very applicable. You say yes to certain mentors based on a certain thing, but if you want to get to a certain level and you're focusing on your identity, then it's very important that you have alignment with the mentor that has the identity of the person you want, because those values will be super important that that person has, and that be the only thing that you choose your mentor on. Because as soon as you choose a mentor, you will become, in small little ways, that person. It's so important that your mentor's identity isn't built about how much money they make or what their results are, not even anything that they do physically. It's all about their values, how they operate, how they see themselves, their identity as a whole. Because if you can choose a mentor based on that, there will be alignment. But if not, there will be misalignment. And misalignment makes you build a fucking completely different business at the end of the day. If you're sat there and you're listening to a guy who you don't feel aligned with values-wise, but you kind of like their program, you kind of like the results, then guess what? The first month in the program, you get a ton of results, right? You end up listening to all of their advice, implementing what they say, and you see some traction, right? Like, stuff's working, but then the support falls off. Then you're sat there thinking, well, I'm not getting enough value out of this program. Like, none of this is working. I don't really feel like I'm paying for much at all now. And at that point, it's like, that's when you can see you're in misalignment. You are misaligned with the person that you once invested in. And that is one of the biggest wastes in this space, where people essentially invest thousands of pounds, thousands of dollars in programs that they once see and they get sold on initially. But the support falls off simply because you are misaligned with that person. If you are truly aligned with the values of the person you invest in, and you know that you would love to be that person, you see yourself as someone who would love to be like that person, and you see yourself conducive with the traits that this person has, there will always be alignment. There will never be a business that you create that will be different from the one you set out to start with. And you're going to make an amazing business that makes an amazing impact because you have the right values. And the person you choose to hold those values, and you invest in to attribute your own values to that, that is what's going to make all the difference in the new identity you take on and you getting the results in the first place, because you see yourself as the person with these values because you're learning from someone who has those exact same values. It is one of the more important things in this space, and I see so many people get it wrong when they invest in someone. Like, that mentor is there to guide you, but you have to be the one that guides yourself based on the values that you have. And if they're not matching up to the person you invested in, then you're going to end up regretting it. You're going to have buyer's remorse. There's going to be so much stuff wrong. And if you've experienced that before, you'll know exactly what I'm on about. So alignment is the best thing that you can prioritize when it comes to building a business, especially if you're investing in someone to help you build it. But they can only guide you as much as you are guiding yourself. And if your values are going in opposite directions, then they will be too far gone. The tectonic plates of your relationship would have gone so far that you would not be able to resolve that. You would have had a completely different business. I've had clients who hate the info business that they built after investing in a ton of mentors and realizing none of their vehicles was something that really spoke to them. There was no alignment at the end of their relationship, and that ended up being wasted money. What people call scams, simply because people weren't aligned on the concept. If you saw yourself as a scammer and you invested in a scammer, then boy, are you going to have a great time. But of course, if the people don't have the right values, you will be misaligned at all points. And so when people invest in mentors, if you don't see that person for who they truly are on their socials, then start to question if they even have the values that you want. Because that is way more important than the ticket price you paid, the actual program itself. When you get down to it, there will always be the values that maintain your ability to see yourself in a certain way. And that is by far the biggest thing when it comes to how you see yourself. But in terms of just, reinforcements on the identity that you have when it comes to business, a lot of people get this wrong when it comes to the price they charge. People charge such low prices that they just stick themselves to their old identity. When you were working your 9-to-5 job, or you were working in a workplace that essentially charged a low ticket for the items, you would think, oh, why would I charge that price at all for what I'm selling? That makes zero sense. But at that standpoint, you're saying to yourself that you'll never be able to grow to a certain identity. The old identity is literally tied to the low price that you have. But if you charge higher, you force yourself to grow to a certain identity. It has a ripple effect in your entire business, from your traffic to your delivery, at that point where you're like, I'm this guy. When you raise your prices, you force yourself to have a certain level of self-trust. You force yourself to visualize certain scenarios. You force yourself to go for certain goals. And at this point, you're saying to yourself now that I trust myself enough to build a better program, to make better content, to improve my systems much more than I used to before in my old identity. But if you're stuck charging low prices, you will only perpetuate the cycle. When the thoughts come in that you don't think you can charge those prices and you don't thought observe them, you become a victim of them. You're sat there thinking, I'm not worth this amount whatsoever. And in the high ticket space and in the online business space, you have to transcend and transmute these feelings. Pardon me, transmute these feelings if you want to get up in business. When you charge higher prices, forcing yourself to grow, charging low prices, you stagnate your growth. And you give in to the dissonance. Giving in to the dissonance. And when I say force you to grow, you are essentially forcing yourself back into your old identity at every given moment. So you should always be raising your prices in a way. And that is one way to improve your product just as a whole, because it will have that ripple effect. But if you've committed to improving your product, right, then you will be able to do so. But if you've not committed to the actual price being raised at this point, you will never improve your product. And that's a big point of what you produce outwardly from your identity, how you see yourself impacting your marketing. I always say that your content is your consciousness made public. So if your consciousness is always stuck at the rate of a low price and how you view and value yourself, then the rest of your product will not improve as a standpoint. And you want your own product to improve, right? You are your product. If you are a coach, consultant, agency owner, you are your product. What you have as a business is always an extension of you. So anything that you do outside of that, especially your frontline price, the thing that you charge for your service or your coaching, it is so important to have a higher price. Because I'll give you an example. When we raised our prices in, I believe it was September, me and Moksh, we decided we're at a 50% close rate. We've got conviction in closing deals. We've built up enough self-trust to the fact that we know that we got a killer product. But we want to be the best. Let's do a comparison. Low and high. We've got low self-trust, which then generates a thing that we don't think our word is law. We say that to ourselves subconsciously. Essentially, can't trust yourself. Therefore, others don't trust you. How can others trust you if you don't trust yourself? Simple as. When you put yourself in a position where you raise your prices, you get rid of that. But as a person who charges lower prices, you have lower self-trust. People can't trust you and they don't buy. They do not buy. You probably can't see that. You cannot see that. Can you? Yeah, no, you can. They don't buy from you. It's as simple as that. And when it comes to getting to a position where you can charge high prices, you have higher self-trust compared to low self-trust. And with that, you have your word is law. You trust yourself to a degree where you can charge those prices. You can grow your product. Your word is law. People trust you. People buy from you. And that speaks to everything. Imagine you're at a state where you have higher self-trust during your content. Then by the time they reach to your sales process, people buy from you. And it starts immediately as the ripple effect of you raising your prices. And that gives you what's known as a sense of self, which is super valuable in this marketplace. So many people have a lack of conviction, a lack of confidence, a lack of sense of self in and of themselves. They don't see themselves as the extension of themselves. They see themselves in small little ways as an extrapolation of everything around them and all their experiences and all their people and all the negative stuff that's happened in their life. Their negative voice in their head is part of them, which is not true. But the way you charge higher prices is by dissolving that voice. And you can get to that state of being at such a strong point of your sense of self that everything just makes sense in the grand scheme of things. By the time you have committed to the product being improved, you would have already reached this level of self-trust where it's like, I can charge these prices, I can do all of this stuff. By the time that you've improved your product, people have come through your sales process and been like, people buying just because of the amount of conviction you have. And raising your prices is one of the biggest things to get yourself to be in that forced position and also have that level of self-trust and conviction. And that's really useful. So charge higher prices. I would always say charge higher prices than you think you are charging right now, because you will then get to the identity of the person who's charging that amount and who has the product and who has everything that you need. And this is one of the concepts that if you improve right now, you can change your entire business. So charge higher prices. It's conducive with self-trust, your word being law, people trusting you more because you trust yourself more, and more people buy from you. Just that your baseline conviction goes up when you raise your prices. So you might as well fucking do it. What's not to lose from raising your prices and otherwise staying in a low frequency state of your old identity with your lower prices? I'm talking like just general low ticket, I would call mid ticket around 2K, and higher ticket up from 5 to 10 onwards. So if you're wondering that from that whole explanation, that was it. Next, I'd love to really go into attachment. People get attachment genuinely so wrong. People think it's just removing the need on call and then everything else will work out when it comes to being in the DMs or anything in terms of that. Your one goal, all these sales managers teach you, is to book a call. But in reality, you need to have the utmost conviction and present that to the prospect, whether you're on the DMs or on a call, to be able to get the outcome that you want. As soon as you have an identity of someone who helps someone who has conviction in that, the close or the book or anything else in between will just be a byproduct of your conviction in your ability to help that person. And that is completely it. When it comes to attachment, whether it be to money, whether it be to the outcome on a sales call, anything in between, your idea behind solving this is have so much conviction in yourself to be able to help that person, or to, when it comes to money, it's to make more money, conviction in your opportunities that you have to be able to execute on everything you need to do. But when I was DM sitting for 11 months, I got hammered by the training of other people, where it's just like, your main objective is to book a call. Just get them to a call. But that put me in a position where all I was doing was being attached to the idea of booking a call and therefore closing that deal. And my commission was based on my lack of conviction rather than anything else that I had as an ability to help the people in the DMs. And the moment I flipped that switch for me in my business, and whilst I was DM sitting as well as all my clients, if you can flip the switch from being attached to simply having the conviction in your ability, wherever it may be, whatever problem you're solving, you will go to the outcome as a byproduct. Because how it works essentially means that if you have conviction it's going to happen, you know it. You're at level 4 of knowing. And that basically means it's not important to you. The importance zeroes out. When it comes to you achieving what it is you want, whether it be booking a call in the DMs or whatnot, it completely removes it from the equation of what it is that is going to generate the outcome. You're speaking to someone, it's not important to you that you get the outcome at all. All you're trying to do is help them, but the only thing that comes across in that scenario is your conviction. That's why it's so important, especially if you're at level 4 of knowing that you can sign prospects, you can book calls, you can do all of this, but the main objective within that is to just help that person. Similar to how it is when it comes to making money. Your main objective is to provide for your business. It's to put more cash into the business so you can flow better. It's not so you can pay your short-term bills, or your experiences in the past have shown that you can't do that. And that drains your conviction. That takes your level 4 level of knowing to something more like a level 2. You're stuck at square one almost, because you don't have the conviction of what it takes to close the deal or to book the call. And so every time you try to do that, it seems that you're grasping at it. You get commission breath, you get all this stuff coming out of you because you just don't have enough conviction to minus out the importance of what it is that you're trying to get after. Next part of attachment, a load of people get wrong, is they end up doing everything to book and close, but when you get to it at the end of the call, they always see that it's more important that you get the outcome than you helping them, or you making more money rather than you injecting more cash into the business. You don't have a longer term vision, and therefore it's never occurring to you what level of knowing you are at within this equation of what we're going after. And so the more that you can minus out the importance, the outcome becomes irrelevant. It just becomes a byproduct. So imagine it as that equation, but you need to completely ignore when it comes to what you think will generate the outcome. It is always going to be conviction. And if you can generate that through building enough self-trust, people can sense that on calls. If you can figure out exactly what it is in terms of exposure, experience, and consistent experience to level you up to level 4, when it comes to knowing a certain truth about yourself and your business, then you will get conviction, and that will bypass any attachment. A lot of people think it's about purely detaching from the outcome. And this is the only way you can really get to that stage. And I think a lot of people miss that. And in my experience with helping clients with this, it's genuinely been a massive flip that you can switch, and massive switch that you can flip to actually achieve attachment. Detachment. Let me rephrase that. Let's get rid of attachment, because it's something that really reeks within this online space. A load of people, say they're going to help you win in this online business world, but really all they're doing when they're training you on how to do things is like reeking of attachment. People can sense that, and it's really that integrity that you gain from saying no to people that comes from this space of conviction rather than this attachment. So to detach, it's simply the equation of conviction minusing out importance equals outcome, byproduct. The more you use these methods, and the more that you focus on your actual identity, who you see yourself as, and how you approach business in terms of your thoughts impacting your outcomes and all this stuff, you can allow your attention to be placed on who you are rather than what you're doing or what you're actually making of business. And I think that's the most important thing, is that none of the outcomes actually matter. It's who you are at each level and who you become to be able to help more people, to make a bigger impact. And eventually you'll see it on every part of my testimonials page where people are getting results purely because this is the focus. So if you want to focus on this and you need help implementing everything that I've explained in this video, then I will leave a special link in the description. I honestly never do this in any of my other videos. It would normally be an application or something, but this, I'm going to offer you one call to be able to digest everything that you're going through right now when it comes to business or problems that you might have encountered in this video or have parallels within your own identity. I'd love to be able to help you with that, but me and my team will contact you if you fill out that form in the description, but soft plug it over. And I really hope you enjoy that video. I know it's going to be super valuable for you to implement, but yeah, this has been Alex Archives Life, and I will see you guys on the next video. Peace out.